Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Nate Hochman joins us in the next hour at 5:30, the senior advisor to America 2100. He's been doing some reporting from all over the country on the border crisis and its impact on the rest of us. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yep, with each passing day as we get closer to the election, more and more polling data is coming out. And, of course, the image of what's going to happen during this election season changes with each one of those reports. For more on all of that, a guy who's always very clear-eyed and sober about it, Ryan Girdusky joins us now. He's a founder of the 1776 Project Political Action Committee and the co-author of the book, They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution. Ryan, good to have you back with us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
The Sun Belt polling out from the New York Times today found that President Trump does look good in a couple of key states. What do you make of the current picture of the election?
Well, I mean, I think that there's two separate things. So there's two kinds of polls out right now. There's the polls that have national polls that have Kamala with a huge advantage, 4+ points, and then there's the polls that have it very close. She's has 2 points, or it's tied, or he's up a little bit. And the main difference between those kinds of polls, because she's polling between 49 and 50% in every single major poll, right? And he's between 46 and 48%. The big question is, what do the third parties candidates get in? And how much is Trump going to overperform his number with men? Men, blacks, Hispanics, those are the three. Right now, Harris is polling about exactly where Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden were with women. It's been almost no uptick in the female vote, which you would think would be there'd be a huge surge, but there's really not. College-educated whites, there's a little pickup. Non-college educated whites, tiny pickup, but not enough to be noticeable. The real question is going to be, how much more does Trump poll? Trump got 52% of the male vote in 2016 and 52% of the male vote in 2020. So nationally, can he get to 53, 54%? If he can, excuse me, 54, if he can, that will offset any kind of gains that she may be able to make with college-educated white voters, maybe some gains she may make with young voters if she gains any. But that's the real question. When it comes to the state polling, you've been seeing a lot of polls that sit there and say Trump's in a decent place in the Sun Belt. He slightly leads in Georgia and Arizona, North Carolina. He's got less than a point overall lead. Florida and Texas are pretty safe, but it's the Rust Belt. It's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I've written about this one point ad nauseum. The New York Times Siena poll had Harris +4 in Pennsylvania, even at the same time that it had Trump and Harris tied nationally. The reason I believe that there is an error in Rust State polling is because seniors vote Republican, right? It's been true for 2 decades at least. That's as far as we have exit data for. For 2 decades at least, seniors are voting Republican. Seniors in Pennsylvania vote more Republican than seniors nationally, which makes sense. There's more veterans on average. They're whiter. They just have a lot of characteristics that would say they're a Trump Republican. They had Harris winning Trump among seniors in Pennsylvania by 3 points, even though they had Trump winning seniors by 6 points nationally. I don't believe the senior number is correct. Nate Cohen, who heads the New York Times Siena poll research stuff, he sat there and said, he was like looking at their working white class numbers and saying, this looks good. And it did. It looked completely fine. Where the error was in my judgment was not in that number. It was in the seniors number. And right now what we're seeing as far as early ballots, although it's very early, Democratic early ballot requests are down significantly. Republican ballot requests are only down slightly. Virginia being the first state for early voting, Republican counties were up over 100% from 4 years ago in the first day of early voting. So there's definitely high enthusiasm. If the Republicans can get lower propensity voters out earlier to go vote in the early election, where they have a month at this point in some places to get out and go vote early, they can still count on their election day victory on election day.
The early vote, a lot of discussion, including some. We had a caller on the last hour who said she's got a cousin who's hesitant to be an early voter, Trump supporter, for out of concern about a ballot fraud and ballot meddling of some kind. But it strikes me that the best course of action is getting that early vote in for a bunch of reasons, including to give the campaign some space to go after to chase other ballots, not yours anymore, and to take your name out of the system and to make sure that your vote is yours, right?
Yeah, listen, if you don't like to get 150 phone calls a day from campaigns saying, "Are you going to go vote early?" But especially if you're a voter who you know what your life is like. If you've got kids, if something may happen on election day, you get a flat tire, it rains, it snows, who knows, and you know that you're not somebody who's a gung-ho, I will show up and go vote kind of person, then go vote early. Those are the people that really Republicans need to go and get, are people who either didn't vote in the last two presidential elections, maybe voted once, never vote in a midterm kind of people. Those are the people who they really need to sit there and get new voters, young men, people who are just low propensity voters. That's who they need to sit there and make their operation surrounded by. Because there are people who will just vote. I've never missed an election in my life. They can guarantee that I will go vote no matter when I will vote. But it is important for people who are not guaranteed voters, who are lazy voters, and they know who they are, that they get out and vote early.
Yeah, or that you pester your lazy family member to finally pull the trigger. You got a couple extra days to do that. Yeah, for sure. Hey, so you mentioned ages and how seniors, you expect some big support there for Trump. When it comes to the age categories, is it the seniors who are the most likely to actually cast a ballot?
Seniors are the most likely to cast a ballot. They have the highest voting propensity. This has been true for decades. They tend to be one of the more Republican groups in the demographics. 50 and over usually always vote Republican.
Yeah.
But the thing about the error in 2016 polling, the error in 2020 polling was surrounded around the seniors responding. It's called polling response bias.
Yeah.
People who want to answer polls. Older liberals who think Rachel Maddow is the voice of God, believe it or not, they tend to love to tell people how much they hate Donald Trump. So they will answer a poll. They'll call the pollster themselves. They won't wait till the phone rings to sit there and say, "Did I tell you I hate Trump and I'm not voting for him?" And that is why you're seeing in 2020. People forget in 2020 they had Biden winning seniors. The NBC poll that was just released that showed Kamala with a 4-point lead. In 2020, they had Biden winning seniors by, guess what, 23 points. He lost them by 4. It was and this year they just didn't publish the senior results at all, so I can't tell you if it was off or not off.
Yeah.
But 4 years ago, it was tremendously off, and it's off among everything. In the last poll, I think it was Quinnipiac, the last Quinnipiac, a week before Joe Biden dropped out, where everyone in America knew he had severe cognitive decline, he had completely blown the entire thing, the whole Democratic Party was wanting to leave. Quinnipiac's poll had Biden winning seniors by 8. Now, it's not true. It's not real. It's not really what's happening. It's just old liberal seniors. They love to answer polls, and they're throwing a lot of these numbers by big, overwhelming margins because they're answering it to such a high propensity. This is my opinion.
Okay, so let me ask you about some other age categories. So I'm just using the crosstabs from the New York Times Sunbelt survey today, and I'm looking at the ages here. And it's pretty clear that if you're 45 or over, in the Sun Belt at least, and my guess is this extends to much of the country, you're supporting Trump. That's the majority are supporting Trump in that age category. It's that 30 to 44 set where you get a lot of Kamala support, a lot. 30 to 44 is the age group, because at 18 to 29, you do have majority Kamala support, but you'd be shocked by how many of the very youngest voters are huge Trump supporters now. What do you make of kind of the generations and the way they're thinking about politics?
Of the geriatric millennial in my group of voters. Yeah, I mean, I think that if you grew up in the early 2000s and George W. Bush was your president, you probably still really hate Republicans. Your memories of the Republican parties were war, the 2008 economy crashing, fights over culture wars like gay marriage that you didn't agree with. And it kind of left a permanent bad taste in your mouth. I don't know if that will ever change. Older millennials, those over 40 tend to sit there and vote more Republican now and have seen some movement, some progress for it. I don't know if it's universal. I don't know if it will stick across the board, but it's definitely an issue going forward. And remember, as you go on in the generations become less and less white. Whites are the only groups that vote majority Republican. So you will see a dip in support among generations simply on demographics alone. Now, young black men especially support Republicans more than old black men do. Middle-aged Hispanics support Republicans at a pretty decently high rate. But that is the obstacle right there, and that is partially reflected in these numbers. As this may be a TikTok election for people under 30 who are getting their news and their information from there, maybe it's changing. Maybe they're dancing to "They ate the cat, they ate the dog" song, and they're wanting to vote for Trump because they think it's cool. I'm not exactly sure because I've surpassed that age range.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I ask about it. I'm also curious. One area of the polling that I think shows a lot of promise for President Trump is that people still rate the economy as their number one concern. They trust him much more than they trust Kamala Harris on handling that. And right track, wrong track polling demonstrates that overwhelming majorities of the country, overwhelming 2/3 of the country, think that we're on the wrong track. I've heard a lot from the Kamala campaign lately that they want to, quote, turn the page as if Trump is president now. But it seems to me that as long as President Trump can beat that drum, which is we've got to get rid of these people because they're causing so many problems for you, the better.
Yeah, I mean, she's really hoping that she could be the change candidate just based on her looks, the fact that she's not white and she's not a man, so she's not Joe Biden. But I this is why she's avoided the press. What is she going to do differently? What is this break that she's going to have with Bidenomics, which she said worked, that she's going to bring in an economy that works for most people, especially for working class people? I have yet to see anything from her campaign, aside from her wanting to extend child tax credits, which the Trump campaign wanted to do as well, and destroy local housing zoning so we could have illegal aliens flood everywhere so houses could be cheaper for them. That's literally the only thing she's ever really said about the economy. She's not discussed in detail how the economy will look completely different under a Kamala Harris presidency versus that of Joe Biden. But this is the strategy of the campaign. It's all about vibes and making sure people could sit there and just judge her on the aesthetics alone and not have to delve into policy, because this is why she never speaks to the media. She's hiding. She's in the basement, like worse than Biden was in 2020.
Yeah, and this week she's promising yet another economic address with no details being provided anywhere about what she's actually going to propose. Lastly, Ryan Girdusky, I want to ask you about Pennsylvania. How important do you think that state is to whoever becomes the winner of this presidential election? We're watching as there's a lot of activity this week. Zelensky is implicitly campaigning for Kamala Harris right now in Pennsylvania at taxpayer expense. President Trump is speaking in Smithton, Pennsylvania, as you and I speak. And meanwhile, Kamala Harris is going to be in Pittsburgh on Wednesday. How essential is this state?
It's the whole ball game. I mean, there's very little chance anyone who is going to win Pennsylvania is going to be president without winning Pennsylvania. It's the entire election. So, if you know anyone in Pennsylvania who has not voted yet, or who was a very lazy voter, get them out to vote for Trump, because it is the entire election. I think it's Nate Silver who said it's a 92% chance whoever wins Pennsylvania becomes the next president. So there's a reason it's Pennsylvania. It's the new Florida. It is the essential swing state, and there's no way to win it without winning Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and clearly Zelensky's detecting that as well. That's why he's there right now. Hey, thank you very much, Ryan Girdusky. Always good to talk to you, sir. And keep it up on CNN, by the way. You're doing great there.
Thanks.
Love that. It's 4:21 now. To the phones we go. Phil is in Fredericksburg on line 2. Phil, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Gallinea Show.
All right. Well, thanks to you, Vince and Corey, and Dan Bongino telling me that Merrick Garland's telling us that they're going to mess with the election in November. For the first time, I went out today at 2:15 and I voted at the Stafford County Registrar's office on Old Potomac Church Road in Stafford County today. And I voted for Donald Trump, and I voted for Hung Kao, and I voted for Mr. Anderson. And I feel good about it. And I would tell anybody who's concerned about early voting is it's no different the way they have this set up than when you vote in November.
Right.
It is a paper ballot. You get the paper ballot, you mark the holes that you want to mark, and then you put it in the machine and it gets counted. It's not like a mail-in ballot. And all along the way, they had observers down the hallways. They had plenty of people to get you checked in, and it was a very secure environment to vote in Stafford County. I was very pleased with the way they had it set up.
And you hand them your ID, Phil, and then they ask you for some confirming information right before they hand you that ballot?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I had my driver's license. I gave him my driver's license. He asked for my address, which I repeated to him. He printed the ballot out, gave it to me. I went and marked it, and then I put it in the machine, just like you do in November. And the thing was not funny, it's really sad. But my boss, when I asked him today, I took 3 hours of paid time off to do this. I said, is it okay if I go vote? He says, yeah, you better go vote before they kill him. That's the first thing he said.
Wow.
I said, Jesus Christ, that's what I told Corey on Saturday. I said, and just to have that statement have to be said about an American, that they're actually trying to get an American killed, and that I'm voting because I want President Trump to understand I appreciate him fighting for the Constitution and fighting for our rights, and he's got my vote right now.
He's already got it.
Okay?
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. And thanks for, keeping the perspective here, which is this is a guy who's now survived 2 very public attempts on his life, with the latest assassin putting out a bounty for more. This is one of the toughest environments we've ever seen for an American politician, definitely this century, and President Trump is enduring it all. Phil casting his vote for him today and encouraging others to do the same. If you haven't voted yet, you can. Do it in Virginia. All right, hold on. It's 4:29. Hey, good afternoon to you. 4:35 here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Nate Hochman has been traveling the country, getting a sense of the effects of the border crisis. He brings his report back to us at 5:30. And you can talk to us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah. You see President Trump's latest campaign ad, one of many. These ads, I can never quite tell. There's so many. They come out so fast and furious. I can never quite tell if they're actual, traditional media market ad buys where they're putting these up on television, or if they're just hilarious Twitter trolls with "I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message" at the end of it. But I do love all of the work on the internet. And there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, is this an actual official Trump campaign ad, or is this just something hilarious that somebody put together? Like for instance, this one seems like a mystery to me. I haven't yet solved it.
We can't afford 4 more years of this.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
That's Tim Walz speaking at the front. That was him over the weekend. We can't afford 4 more years of this. And then there's Donald Trump at the end. I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message. Now, as of this moment, I'm not sure. Have we figured it out, Corey? Is it an official? We don't know. But we love it. We love it. And why would the Trump campaign object, right? It's not like somebody at the Trump campaign is going to get their lawyers all worked up here. They'll be like, hey, send those guys a cease and desist. They're probably laughing just as hard as we are. We can't afford 4 more years of this. I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message. Here's another one. Again, the Kamala Harris one. Did they do this one? The deportation thing? We don't know. We don't know. Nor do we care.
Now they have pledged to carry out the largest deportation, a mass deportation in American history. Imagine what that would look like and what that would be.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Now, this next one we know is real. This is the Donald Trump campaign, because they put this out over the weekend, this weekend, about how Kamala Harris is for all sorts of genital mutilations, and Donald Trump is for not that.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender. inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Holy cow! That was when I heard that this weekend. That last little riff. That last little riff where they're like, Kamala's for they, them, Donald Trump.
And illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
That was a fan service ad. I think they made that for me. That was so well done. Who wrote that? That guy deserves a raise, or that wonderful woman, whoever did that. That's great. Also, one of the cool things about the modern era is that it's not just the Trump campaign's opposition research shop that's digging into everything Kamala's ever done. And there's a lot. She's done a lot. But back in 2018, the internet has discovered she was out on the streets chanting that it's time to end deportations in America.
Up with education, down with deportation. 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 Up with education.
And there she is. She's right there. Up with education, down with deportation. Now, of course, once again, that's a lie. They're for down with education, down with deportation is what they actually advocate for. They're not interested in educating people. They're definitely interested in propagandizing them, misleading them, deceiving them, not educating them. And so she was right there in the streets chanting gleefully to end deportations in the United States. In other words, end border enforcement, end our sovereignty, end consequences for foreign nationals who come into our country illegally. Nobody's for that. Legal immigrants are not for that. American citizens are not for that. By wide margins, American citizens like sovereignty. They'd like to keep the country together. They'd like to keep the country for their own kids and make some decisions about who comes in a reasonable way and assimilates. But that's not what the left stands for. That's not what their big moneyed interests stand for. That's not what Janet Yellen stands for. That's not what Jerome Powell stands for. I was playing audio for you Friday of both the Fed chair and the Treasury Secretary last week praising the virtues of illegal immigration. They love it. They love the open border. They say it's been great. It's been great because it's driven down wages. How does an open border drive down wages? Well, that's right. When millions of people pour in, it means Americans get paid less. Oh, the labor market is chock full of people who shouldn't be here. This is great. And with unemployment struggles going up, with wages going down, with Americans having less disposable income, they say, oh, well, the inflation problem solved. Americans don't have money to spend. So now the cost of goods will go down. This is the way that they want to fix, quote, fix inflation. This is the actual economic policy of Kamala Harris and her ilk. Drive up the cost of everything with government spending, then make you bear the cost with lower wages. That's their actual economic plan. So when you see the data with 2/3 of Americans in this New York Times survey today saying we're on the wrong track as a country, well, that's why. That's why. And that's where, if you're the Trump campaign, of course, that's what they've been doing. You have to be reminding people that the reason we're here, Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, and especially in her case, because not only is she vice president of the United States, she's been a very involved vice president. It hasn't been some ceremonial position for her. She's the number one tie-breaking vice president in the Senate in American history. She's voted for all of this. She actually cast those votes. She was a part of it. She got the destruction of the country over the finish line. That's what her vice presidency's been. I've been looking a bit into Kamala Harris's life story a little bit more. Normally in a presidential campaign, you have months to do this. You have, and perhaps years in some cases. Oh, so-and-so's the front runner. Let's find out more about them as they rise up in the national consciousness as the leading candidate. Now, Kamala Harris, of course, has been vice president. And as I mentioned, an impactful one. But up until very recently, she wasn't the nominee for president at all. But now all of a sudden she is. And so the normal period in which you would have spent looking into her life and her influences and her ideology and that kind of under the microscope glance that you need to give her, well, we're working in a very condensed period. So I've been looking into some more information about, in particular, her father. Her father. Now, her dad's name is Donald Harris. He's a retired professor from Stanford University. And he is, you may have heard from President Trump recently, just to reconfirm, a Marxist. He's a Marxist professor. That was his career, as a Marxist professor at Stanford. In fact, I went and I pulled the student newspaper, the Stanford Daily, from 1976, because it's been referenced in some coverage of her father. But in that newspaper, they describe Donald Harris as a Marxist scholar. This is how they refer to him on campus. He's a Marxist scholar and a Pied Piper leading students astray. This is Kamala's pop, what he was up to. This is just a clipping from the student newspaper. It's headlined "High Student Interest." They say one argument raised 2 years ago in the economics department in opposition to the permanent appointing of visiting professor Donald Harris, a Marxist scholar, was that his excellence as a teacher attracted students to study in his area of instruction. Some economics faculty took high student interest in Harris's courses as, one, a signal of student inability to select courses important to their education, and two, a demonstration of the danger of good teaching directing student interest away from the areas of investigation other faculty preferred students address. In other words, they say some students are dumb and they're being misled here. Others are falling for his attractive personality. Apparently, he was a kind of an influential guy, and he's leading them down a path that they shouldn't be going down. Harris was described as too charismatic, a Pied Piper leading students astray from neoclassical economics. In brief, Harris taught bad courses too well, they said. Not long ago, another university of high reputation actually sought to appoint an ineffective teacher to discourage growing student interest in Marxian economics. Isn't that funny? So apparently, sometimes at the time, this is the 1970s, some other high-level college wanted to dissuade students from becoming Marxists, so they hired a crappy professor to teach the Marxist theory to dissuade them. But apparently, Kamala's dad was pretty compelling. He was cooking up little Marxists by the dozens in his classroom. They were kind of into it. Students will quickly recognize the parallel between the absence of faculty confidence in student ability to select an academic program which fits their needs and a lack of confidence in student ability to evaluate teaching. So that was the student newspaper pointing this out back in 1976. Now, some other interesting things here. The Washington Post in September of this year, meaning the month we're in right now. In fact, let me just reiterate the way I present this. A week ago, on September 15th, the Washington Post ran a story about how Kamala Harris needs to talk about her dad more. It was an op-ed. It said, Harris doesn't talk about her father. That might be a mistake, said the headline. It was written by a guy called Matt Bai. And he was insisting that this is a great story, that she should talk about him. And the piece begins that Donald Trump has a penchant for going after the family members of his adversaries. So it wasn't surprising when he resorted to this tactic a few minutes into his debate with Vice President Kamala Harris. And remember, what did Trump say? Trump said, everybody knows she's a Marxist, he said. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. That was Trump on that debate stage. Harris gave no sign of having even heard Trump's remark, says the Post. She didn't mention her father once during the entire 90-minute debate. This was partly because of a strategic decision to ignore Trump's personal attacks, and maybe also because outside of her convention speech, she has generally avoided talking about Donald Harris, her Jamaican father, at all. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that? We had a caller, I think, last week who mentioned that. Like, how come she never talks about her dad? She talks about her mom all the time. She talks about her Indian mother all the time, but her Jamaican father, nothing. She doesn't say anything. Whatever the reason, the Post says, it seems to me that by not talking more about both of her parents and her mixed race identity, Harris is failing to exploit an opening that she has with voters who might well decide the election. And then they go on to this guy goes on to criticize Republicans and on, and nativists, and yada, yada, yada. But he thinks that this is a great story that she should tell. Harris's origin story, her birth to two educated immigrant parents and the adversity she overcame after they divorced, affirms everything these voters, that would mean MAGA voters, believe about this city on a hill. And yet for reasons I find baffling, says this Washington Post columnist, Harris barely touched on it during her CNN interview last month or in the debate. She briefly mentioned her mother, but that's only partly illuminating. It feels incomplete, a story we've entered in the second act. Maybe she thinks her Jamaican roots are too outside the mainstream of America, both black and white. Maybe she wants to avoid the immigration issue altogether, considering it a weakness, which it is, he says. Or perhaps she just doesn't like talking about her father or worries about what he might say. You know, it's funny. It is true that she may have some reason to be worried about his public remarks. A couple years ago, she was on The Breakfast Club. She was on The Breakfast Club, the morning radio show. And during it, she said out loud that she did smoke weed and she did inhale when she was younger. Do you remember this? And she alleged during that interview, she said, well, half my family's from Jamaica. Are you kidding me? In other words, of course I smoked weed. Of course I smoked pot. I'm half Jamaican, she says. Now, that comment earned a rare public remark from her father. And he gave it to an online website called Jamaica Global Online, which, of course, is written for people who are interested in the affairs of Jamaica. But during his remarks to them, he said that he wanted to categorically dissociate himself from Kamala Harris. Her father said that. He said the following: my dear departed grandmothers, whose extraordinary legacy I described in a recent essay on this website, as well as my deceased parents, must be turning in their grave right now to see their family's name, reputation, and proud Jamaican identity being connected in any way, jokingly or not, with the fraudulent stereotype of a pot-smoking joy seeker in the pursuit of identity politics, he wrote. Listen to this. This guy, so here's what I'm learning about him. He's an actual class-based Marxist. And he doesn't like this identity politics crap that's coming out of the mouth of his daughter. And he's attacking her in public about this. He said, speaking for myself and my immediate Jamaican family, we wish to categorically dissociate ourselves from this travesty. It's her father's remarks about her. And that was his reaction. Now, it's funny, the Jamaica Global piece, they're funny about this because in that very same piece, they come along and they say that they're mad at Kamala Harris, too. The piece, by the way, has been deleted from this Jamaica Global website. It's no longer available, but I pulled it from the archive. I was able to get a hold of it. And they say an ironic twist in Ms. Harris's associating marijuana smoking with her Jamaican heritage that seems to have escaped her, as well as media watchers, is the fact is that it is also very much a part of her Indian heritage that she is so proud of claiming. Is she aware that it was India that bequeathed a marijuana culture to Jamaica? The Jamaican paper says. And they refer to something called the Encyclopedia of Jamaican Heritage. Oliver Sr. writing, quote, the practice of cultivating, smoking, and otherwise consuming the herb, marijuana, is believed to have been popularized by Indian indentured immigrants who began to arrive from 1845. The local name ganja is Indian. The concept of ganja as a holy herb is a Hindu one. It is widely used to enhance the religious experience in parts of India, despite government prohibition. And then they say the Jamaica site says, this seeming lack of knowledge about the connection between her Indian and Jamaican heritage provides additional ammunition for some Jamaicans who are of the view that Ms. Harris tends to downplay her Jamaican heritage when it suits her, crediting her Tamil Indian mother with the most significant influence on her life and outlook, and rarely talks about her father's influence. Her father, Donald, hardly ever gets credit, except when mentioned alongside her mother, but rarely as an individual. Even when asked by her host in the now famous marijuana interview about her motivation to enter the presidential race, Ms. Harris referenced only her mother, whom she said raised her and her sister Maya with many beliefs and rules, one being never to sit and complain about something, but to do something about it. So here, isn't this funny? That's this Jamaica Global piece, Jamaica Global Online. They sound like Donald Trump. Trump said, "Hey, what's the deal? How come she changes her identity to suit the audience she's in front of? What's that about?" And so the Jamaica website says, "Hey, what's the deal? Why is she constantly downplaying her Jamaican heritage? And why is she blaming her Jamaican heritage for her pot smoking when she very well could have blamed her Indian heritage?" they ask. It's kind of fun. Again, that piece has been purged from the internet. So I don't know. I don't know who she paid off or how they got to them, but it exists in the archives. All right, coming up on the Vince Coglianese Show, President Trump, he just concluded some remarks in Pennsylvania and had a very clear warning for American businesses who try to sell out American workers. I'll share that with you. Also, Tim Walz, you know that guy? Turns out he's a segregationist. More details on that ahead. A lot more on the Vince Coglianese Show.